What is going on, PowerAppers? This is Todd Baginski. I've got another great video for you here on PowerApps. In case you haven't met me before, welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm a Microsoft MVP. I'm also the partner and the CTO at my company, Canvas. I work with an outstanding collection of folks. I just love working on technology. I love PowerApps. You know what else I love? I love power chords. You know, cheesy little things like this. Just stuff like that, you know. So the bummer to YouTube, even though I can make these cool videos and share them with all the whole world and help people learn how to use this technology, the real bummer about it is that if I play any of my favorite songs, this video gets yanked right off YouTube because I don't own those songs. So that's why I have to stick with playing cheesy little power chord riffs like this. You know, stuff like that. So anyway, what's this video about today? This video is really cool. It's got a little of everything in it. It's got PowerApps. It's got Flow, custom connectors, Azure Application Insights, Azure Functions. A lot of cool stuff in there, right? We're going to use it all together to do something really neat that you need in all your PowerApps. And that's logging. So what would you use logging in PowerApp for? Would you use it to count how many times you played this riff? Probably not. No, you wouldn't use it for that. What I think you'd use logging for would be maybe something went horribly wrong in your PowerApp and an exception occurred and you needed to log that. Maybe you could use it to determine how people are using your app. Which pages are they going to the most? What functionality did they use the most? Maybe you could even get smarter than that. Maybe you could use that logging to say a user came to this page and performed this action, and then I got an exception and logged it. So now you know what the user did to make your Power App blow up. We don't want that to happen, but if it does happen, we want to make sure we know how to capture that so we can understand the error, fix it, and make our users really happy. So happy they want to play power chords. Maybe not. Anyway, so that's what the video is all about today. I'm going to show you how to use all those different things to log what your users are doing, as well as if you get any exceptions in your Power App. Write it all to App Insights, a really easy place to digest that information, analyze it, and figure out how to make your Power App even better. So I hope you enjoy this video. We're going to get started with it after we play one more cheesy power chord riff. Or something like that. All right, so hold on. Here we go. This is a big video, lots of moving parts in it. So many moving parts that I made this incredibly amazing Visio diagram to share with you too. And this video diagram essentially illustrates all the pieces of the puzzle inside of this particular video and approach and pattern I'm showing you here on how to log from a Power App. So let's walk through these pieces of the puzzle. We've got our Power App, and that Power App can invoke a flow to call a custom connector, or it can call a custom connector directly. I'm going to show you both patterns that I just described there and that you see illustrated in this diagram in just a bit in the demo. This custom connector, in turn, is going to call into 3 different Azure functions I've created. One is called track event, another track exception, another track page view. These particular functions here do exactly what they say. I tried to name them so they made sense. What they do is they call into the Azure Application Insights C# SDK. So as you can probably imagine, these Azure functions are written in C#, and I'll show you the code for them as well. They're going to call into the SDK, and then they're going to perform operations that have pretty much the exact same names in Application Insights. And when they do that, what that allows me to do is it allows me to write and log events that are occurring, exceptions that are occurring, as well as page views that are happening in my PowerApps or in my flows. Now, page view in a flow, probably not as applicable, but can events or exceptions happen in a flow? You betcha. So we can log all these things from all those different places. Now there's another architecture you could do here too. I didn't do this in this video though, but there's no reason you can't. And that's this approach right here. Essentially what you can see is I've removed the connector from the picture. I like the connector in the picture. I like it because if I have the connector in the picture, I can just update my connector anytime I want to update how it works with my Azure functions. I can just deploy it one time and then easily call it from anywhere else I want. If I don't have the connector, it's harder for me from Flow to call the Azure function. I've got to go in there and specify more information in the flow every time I wish to invoke that Azure function. And if I need to update it, it's a little bit harder for me to do too. It also requires that my Power App relies on a flow. The example I'm showing you, it does show it can use it with a flow or without. I prefer without if possible. It's less things I have to support and deploy. So you could go either way. A lot of this is personal preference. The way I built it here, and I'm going to show it to you, is this architecture you see right here. So let's dig in and let's actually run this and see it happen top to bottom. And then we'll start digging into each component and I'll show you how I built them and how you can build them in your own Power Apps too. All right, you remember this app? If you haven't seen it before, I strongly encourage you to go find my other YouTube video where I talk about Power App error handling, because everything I do in this app is built on what I showed you in the error handling video. So I'm not going to spend much time, really any time here, on the error handling pattern. I'm going to be focusing on the logging pattern here. So go watch that other video, then come back to this one, and you'll understand how the error handling works. And I will put a link to that video inside of the notes here, so you can quickly find that video and go check it out. All right, so let's actually run this end-to-end now and watch our logging happening. So the first thing that I want to point out here is that I have this toggle control down here. And it allows me to turn on logging to Application Insights. So right now it's turned off. I'll turn it on here in a second. Then I have two different Application Insights instances. One that I'm writing to from my custom connector, and this is what that instance key looks like. And another AI instance that I'm going to write to when I write from Flow. I keep them separate just because I'd like to show how you can log the two different spots. It also helps us keep the messages separate because we're going to log different messages to different spots. It really helps us validate what's in each spot as well. I'd also like to bring your attention to this correlation ID right here. Notice this is a variable called GBL correlation ID. You can see in the app on start method right here, I set it to a new GUID. I also set some other things inside of here, such as the name of the app, the name of the environment I'm running it in, as well as the user's alias. I use these things as I log the different exceptions and information Application Insights, as you'll see. Because these values, most especially the correlation ID value here, are set in apps on start method, they will be consistent throughout the entire length of time or session that someone interacts with this app. So that's what I'm using correlation ID with, and I'm going to log with that too, because that allows me in Azure Application Insights to do queries for everything with that correlation ID and sift out from everyone else logging and what they're doing in the app with an individual user session in case I need to target that session for debugging purposes. Okay, so let's take a look here at actually just running this and seeing what data we're going to get. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take it and put it into preview mode by hitting the play button there, and now I'm going to turn on Send to Application Insights. So now all the actions that I perform are going to actually log things. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a global error. And when I create that global error, we see right there, I just logged it to Application Insights as well as an exception. And now I can clear that error. And now I can go over to screen 2. And now that I've gone over to screen 2, I'm going to create an error from screen 2. Notice it says it came from screen 2, and I made up my own error code and text here. Now I'm going to go back to the home screen, and I'm going to clear that error out. So those were some actions that I just performed there. I made an error. I went to the second screen. I made another error. Then I came back to the first screen. So we should see the fact that I went to the different screens logged as well as the errors that were created. Now I'm going to make some more errors. I'm going to create a context error with a context variable, and that just made an error, and now that error was logged, and now I'm going to go ahead and clear that error. So there were several different things that happened in this app that I logged. Now let me show you the code for what it looked like when I logged them. In fact, before I dig into the code, I want to show you what these things look like when they get logged to Application Insights. Let's see what we just caused to occur from that logging point of view. So this Application Insights instance right here is called by a flow. The flow calls the custom connector. The PowerApp actually calls the flow first. The flow calls the custom connector. The custom connector calls the Azure function, which uses the Application Insights SDK to write these two messages here. Okay, so you can see these here. These have a date here of like 5 days ago. So I'm going to refresh it, and it takes usually a few minutes for them to pop up. But what I want to point out is the important things here. I'm logging two things from this app via the flow. The first thing that I logged is the exception that I created on the home screen. And the second thing was the custom event of the home screen button create error context was clicked. If we come back here, you can see this is the button create error context right here. So when I clicked this button and I caused that error to occur, I actually logged the fact I clicked the button right here. And then when that button actually created an exception, if I click on the exception, we can see the details. We can see that here's the environment. Remember when I set that nap on start? That's where I got that from. I've got the error code, a correlation ID, the user's alias, the PowerApps name, the message, the exception type, and the time it occurred. So I'm logging this information app insights. It's very helpful for me. I've also logged without going through the flow to demonstrate that pattern. And I logged more things without the flow than I did with. The things that I logged here were first clicking the button to create an exception, and then clicking the exception itself. You can see they got in here at the same exact time because I clicked the button and then the exception came in, but I know which one I click first. Then we have a page view. I recorded the fact I looked at page 2. Then we made that exception on page 2, and then recorded when I navigated back to page 1. So I can watch the whole user's trail of what went on here inside of App Insights. So I think enough time has gone by now. I'm going to actually refresh this now, and we'll take a look at the ones I just created, and now they are there. See? So this time it got these in the right order. Here's when I clicked button create error global. If I take you back here, you can see this is button create error global. And when I did that, I created my error, and then my exception handling handled the error, and it wrote it to App Insights right here. So I could see that on the home screen, we have a problem is the message that occurred and all my metadata. Notice my correlation ID, 340, it starts out, is the same as back here in my app. You may have noticed before when I was looking at the data from a few days ago that the correlation ID started with the 7, because as I said, the correlation ID changes each time you open the app. Other things we can see that have occurred back here is we had the page view. So I looked at screen 2, I triggered the exception that got logged, and then I went back to screen 1. So as we can see, we are able to log those exceptions, the events, and the page views, just like we saw back in the Visio diagram. We're tracking the events, the exceptions, and the page views. So now that you've seen everything essentially end to end, right? We ran it in the app, and now we have seen it appear in App Insights and we can do something with it. Let's learn about how we got the data there. So we're going to start off first inside of the PowerApp. And let's just take a look at what happens when I click Create Global Error. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to set the global error occurred to true. We're going to set the screen variable equal to this. This comes right out of PowerApps, app.activescreen.name. That'll tell you the name of the screen you're running on right at that point in time. So I want to log that so that I know as I look in App Insights where my problem is and what screen in the PowerApps. That's why I use that. I just made up this error code, a 911 here, and the error text. Typically, you would take the values for the error code and the error text that you pass in the App Insights, and you would get them from some exception handling that you build into your application. So, to actually write the data to Application Insights, the first thing that I showed you that I wrote was this custom event right here, that I clicked that particular button. So to actually log the fact I clicked the button, I'm in the onSelect event for that button. And here I invoke Application Insights log.azurewebsites.net track event method. If we look up and view data sources, we can see here is the Application Insights log.azurewebsites.net. This is my custom connector that I built that invokes my Azure functions. You will also notice that there are 3 other data sources. All 3 of them invoke a flow. Each one of these flows, in turn, will invoke one of these Azure functions, tracking page view, tracking event, or tracking exception. So if I look at the actual Azure functions, here we can see them. I have my Application Insights log.azurewebsites.net is my URL for this function app. And I have the track event, track exception, and track page view Azure functions that I have created. If I take a look at the code for these, you can see here is my project where I actually coded up these Azure functions. This class, the functions class, defines the Azure functions that I've created. And they're all very similar to each other here. I have one called track exception. I have another one called track page view. And I have a third one called track event. Let's take a look at the code for one of them. You can understand how we actually use the SDK to write the data to App Insights. So, in my track exception function, the first thing that I do, you can see according to my comments, is I get the data from the payload. So this right here just sets a bunch of variables equal to the data that's being passed into this function. The connector, or the flow, is what's passing this data into the function. And it comes in a JSON format. After I've got the data, I'm going to check to make sure that everything is required, that I have it. So I'm just doing an is null or empty on every single property that I set above, or pardon me, variable. And if I don't have that information, I just return an HTTP bad request or 400 status error and say what they were missing. I want to make sure that the data I'm logging is robust, so I'm not going to accept data that's blank. After that, I create a new properties collection, and I'm going to use this properties collection or dictionary of properties, I should say, to add them to the exception. So I'm going to add the correlation ID, the app name, the environment, the user's alias, and the error code. We saw all those different things inside of the Application Insights user interface. So the first thing I do is I build up a dictionary of them. Then I go get the instrumentation key. The instrumentation key is my key that says I'm allowed to write to App Insights. So I definitely need that piece of the puzzle too. Notice I'm getting this passed in from the PowerApp or the flow. You could also write your code so that you didn't pass it in from the PowerApp and the flow like I did. And you could just go look it up from the app settings for the function app or some other configuration store. It's really up to you. Now we're ready to actually log the exception to Application Insights. And to do this, I created another class. It's called the AI Utility class. And you can see I'm calling a method on it called trackException. I like to stay consistent in my naming. Notice the function's name is trackException and my helper name class is trackException. I pass in the source, the message, the instrumentation key, and that dictionary of properties. After I've done that, then I create a response to reply with the HTTP code equal to 200, and I say succeeded. If a problem occurs, I log the error, and then I return a 500 error. So let's take a look at this trackException here. This is where we actually write it to Application Insights. Notice trackException, I have a few different ones. I have one for page view and one for event. Exception is the most complex. The first thing I need to do is create a new exception telemetry class. Then I create a new PowerApps exception class. Notice this class down below inherits from exception. I pass the message into that new class, and then I set its source to the source value that was passed in. I then set the exception telemetry class's exception property equal to that new PowerApps exception class that I just passed in my message and my source to. Now that I've got that done, I create a new telemetry client class. This is the class that actually allows me to write to Application Insights. I'm going to make sure I have an instrumentation key. I'm going to set that on the telemetry client, and then I'm going to call trackException on the actual telemetry client itself, and I'm going to pass in that PowerApps custom exception I created, as well as the different properties of the dictionary that were passed in. All that right there essentially writes that exception to Application Insights. Now we can look at the other methods here too, and we can see track event and track page view. They're much simpler. We don't have to build up the exception telemetry or PowerApps exception custom class. All we have to do is essentially say, pass in the name and the properties to create and to track an event, and to track a page view, we just pass in the name. In both cases, we also take in the instrumentation key so that we can use that to authenticate our telemetry client, which allows us to write to Application Insights. So that's really under the hood what's writing to AI. So how did we call it from the Power App? We saw that. We saw that right back here. If we go to the create global error again, we can see track event calls our track event method in our custom connector, and it passes in the name, the instrumentation key, and the properties. Notice the name is equal to the GBL screen, which is dynamic. It's the app's active screen name. And then I put in a space and a dash and a space, and then I put in button create error global clicked to say exactly which event I'm tracking. So I say on this screen, I did this. Here's my instrumentation key. And by the way, here's the error code text, and my correlation ID so I can track this event and see what's happening with it. Now, in addition to just tracking that event there, one thing that we can look at is back here. And we can see in our error handling logic, which I talked about in the other video, this is where I'm actually calling track exception. So the first one I walked through was, hey, I clicked the button. Now this one is, oh, I triggered an error while I clicked that button. I did it on purpose. And now here in my error handling logic, I call track exception. And you can see all the different things I pass into my exception so that I have as good a chance as possible as determining how this occurred, when it occurred, what steps made it occur, and what was the error message and code I got back. So all of this down here goes into tracking that exception. Now the other thing that I demonstrated was, if we go back here, we can see that we tracked a page view. We did that via the connector because this is my AI instance from connector. And when I went to page 2, as well as when I came back to the home screen, we logged the page view. So how do we do that? Well, let's go and take a look at the home screen here, and let's look at its on visible action. And again, you can see here, I'm tracking. If the toggle app insights.value is true, and that was that toggle control you saw me turn on at the beginning of the demo, this guy right here. If that guy's true, then let's use that custom connector again, and let's call track page view. All I need to pass in is the name of the page, because that's really all you can log in Application Insights. So here again is a dynamic name of the screen. Doesn't matter what you rename it to on the left, it's always going to pick it up right here for you. And then the instrumentation key, which is that text AI key value right here. So that's how I wrote my page views. Now we also saw that I logged this from Flow. I logged a couple things from Flow, right? I logged the button create error context. This is the button that creates a context error. And then also the function, or I mean the exception that got created as a result of that. So let's see how we called it from a flow. If I dig back in here, this is that actual button that got logged. So here, if you remember, if we look at data sources, we can see that we have 3 flow data sources: track page view, track event, and track exception. They do the same thing to call the Azure function to write this to App Insights, but they skip the custom connector. So here we can see that if I come back to the code that triggers this, here's the track event flow, and I call run the flow, and you can see in the IntelliSense at the top, what am I passing in? I'm passing in the name, I'm passing in the instrumentation key, and then any properties. So here I again use the dynamic name of the screen. I pass in some other text to indicate which button I clicked. Here's the key to log to the Flow AI instance. And here's my error code text and my correlation ID again. Now, I also wrote something else to Application Insights there. And I did that from my error handling pattern. And this is the only difference is I call track exception flow and then run. And now I'm passing in all these values to track that exception inside of my flow. If we come back to our flows now, we can actually see here that this is the one from 4 days ago. But if I reload the screen, we should see that this happened since I've been talking and recording this video. There we go. 18 minutes ago is when I ran it. So here we can see this is when we called track event, and we can actually watch what happens. PowerApp invokes it. It calls the custom connector. Here are the inputs that I got from the custom connector. And then the output, of course, was just my 200 that the Azure function returned. There's only one piece of the puzzle left that we haven't taken a closer look at yet. And that piece is the custom connector itself. So here is my custom connector. You can notice that it is pointed at that application insights log.azurewebsites.net. Here it is. That's this function app that I deployed to Microsoft Azure. You can also see in the security that I've set it up for the API key, which means you have to pass in that instrumentation key in order to make this work. The instrumentation key that I just spoke about, I misspoke on that. You have to pass in the instrumentation key in order to make it work. Yes, that's correct. But you have to make that key is for Application Insights SDK to write to App Insights. This API key here is the master key to this function app back here. That in the function app settings, I can get this key value. And when I add this custom connector to a PowerApp or flow and I run it for the first time as a user, it's going to ask me what that master key is. And so that's what I typed in at that point. And that's what authenticates me to the Azure function. You could also set this up to use no auth, basic auth, OAuth 2 with AAD. All of those are valid scenarios. I just chose this one because it's very easy to set up in a demo point of view, because all I have to do is know that key and paste it in the first time I use the connector. Okay, so then I have the definition of the connector itself. And as you can probably guess, we've got the three events: track event, track exception, and track page view. So I like to look at track exception. It's the most complex one. You can see we've described what it does at the top. Then we can actually look at what it's doing. It's invoking this API at this URL, and here's the body that it's passing in. It's passing in the app name, the correlation ID, the environment, the error code, instrumentation key. This is the one that authenticates to AI. Message, source, and user alias. We saw back in the code where I'm actually taking in all of these different values back here. And now we can see how they're being forwarded on by the connector. If you want to learn how to build a custom connector, I suggest looking at my blog. There's other blogs out there as well. I walk you through how to create one. There are some good ones out there as well that other people demonstrate how to connect them to Azure functions. It's pretty straightforward stuff, and within about an hour you can get your first one up and running. One important thing to point out: if you update your code inside of your Azure function right here, and you update this portion of the code that takes in your parameters, if you make an update to this code and you republish your Azure function, sometimes this page will allow you to come back here and import from sample and paste in the JSON definition that makes up your new body, and it will work fine as long as your new body matches the change you made. Other times, I have found this page does not even care how many times you tell it what the new signature looks like for that method. And what I have to do is simply delete my custom connector and create a brand new one, and then it'll pick up the changes. Other things to keep in mind. Sometimes, if you update a custom connector, all you need to do is close the Power App and open it back up in the editor. And then you'll be able to code toward that new signature that you write right in here. Actually, this is from a flow. If we do it through the custom connector, the example would look like this. Sometimes this signature that you create for the method will automatically just work for you when you come back in here. Other times it won't. And I found that what I have to do is I copy my code out and I just remove it. And then I delete the custom connector data source. I save and publish my Power App. I close my Power App. I open it back up in the editor. I add the new custom connector back. Then I can paste my code in and it'll respect the new signature I set up for that method. I know it's kind of crazy, but that's been my experience that I've seen and how I work around it. I've seen other people report it on the internet too in various forums, so I don't think I'm alone in how sometimes it plays nice when you change the interface signature of your Azure function with a custom connector. Other times it does not. One last thing to remember about the custom connector. After you create the custom connector, sometimes it can take as long as 5 to 10 minutes until the updates you've created for your custom connector show up here in the Power App editor. So that's just something to be mindful of as well. So now you've pretty much seen that all the pieces of the puzzle. I've shown that I had a flow here for track event. I can also come back in and here's my flow for track page view, and here's my flow for track exception. You can notice that all three of them have my log to Application Insights custom connector registered. And if we actually look at what the flow does itself, let's go back here and edit the flow and just take a look. You can see that the Power App is going to invoke the custom connector, and all it's doing is passing in the properties that were directly obtained as parameters from the Power App. There's nothing else happening in there because these Azure functions, that's all they need to do is take in these values and then they can write to App Insights. So when you're all done and you have this going over time, whether you used a custom connector or not, you're going to be in the position where you're able to track all this information right inside of App Insights and deeply dive into the logs and all the nice out-of-the-box things that are going on with App Insights that help you understand how your app is working. Hopefully this video, even though it has been very long, is very helpful for you. And it's probably more helpful than listening to those cheesy power chords like we had at the beginning of the video. Hope you get a lot out of it. Looking forward to seeing your feedback about this video. Thanks, everybody. Thanks again for watching that epic video. I hope you got a lot out of it. Go hitting that like button, subscribe, you know what to do. If you'd like to work together sometime, hit me up over at canvas.com. I work with folks we meet from these YouTube videos all the time. If you'd like to see more videos about cool tech and less cheesy power chords, check them out down here. I'll see you next time.